All right. Hi, Bio2. This is going to be a presentation over our blood vessels. So last week we learned about blood and what was in our blood, and this week we get to learn about some of our blood vessels. There's really three major types that we get to talk about, and that's what this is going to be about. So we're going to continue. Here we go. The first type of blood vessels that we get to look at are arteries, which are really these big blood vessels that we have. And we're going to learn a little bit. I like this picture. We're going to learn about the different tissue layers that make up our arteries. Just to give you some information about arteries, they are efferent vessels, which basically means they carry blood away from the heart and towards capillaries. And I just remember like arteries away from the heart, they both start with the letter A. That's always the job of an artery. So whenever I ask, what's the function of an artery? It's carrying blood away from the heart. For the most part, most arteries are going to have lots of oxygenated blood in them, hence why I try to show arteries as red. That usually represents oxygenated blood, but they have lots of muscular walls that make them really elastic and contractile, which means this is how we get our, if you ever taken your blood pulse before, the pulse of your body, you always have to find an artery to do that because they're very muscular and you can feel them pulsating through your body, like in your wrist or on your neck. All right, so we get to go into what an artery looks like and talk about how arteries have three tissue layers. You are going to need to know and be able to recognize these three tissue layers. And this kind of brings us back to tissues from first semester. So the very first layer is the outermost layer. It's called the tunicate externa, or sometimes it's called the adventitia. I like this word just because this is on the outer edge, but both of them are used. It is the outermost layer, and it's basically made up of elastic fibers and collagen. Or what I would maybe write down is this layer basically is made up of, connective tissue, lots of connective tissue. Okay, the tunica media like the medium or the middle, it's the middle one. In arteries, it's usually one of the thickest layers because it has tons of smooth muscles. This is what makes the arteries do their contracting, is their smooth muscles, okay? A little bit of elastic fibers, but mainly this is made up of muscle tissue. Remember, our muscle tissue, smooth muscles, all right? And the tunica intima, this is the innermost layer. It's made up of endothelial cells, which are a type of epithelial tissue, because again, remember, epithelial tissue always lines stuff, and it's usually really thin. So if you look at these three different tissue layers, we basically have three different types of tissues making up arteries, which are considered to be an organ. You have connective tissue for the most part, muscle tissue for the most part, and epithelial tissue for the most part. Let me show you what these look like. Here's a nice little picture of it. You can see how the outer layer is a little thinner. That middle layer is made up of lots of smooth muscle tissue, so it's pretty thick. And then the innermost layer, the tunica intima, is very thin. It's one cell thick. Can you see how it's only one cell thick? Epithelial tissue. Okay, and again, they have a pretty narrow lumen. What's really, when you think of arteries, you think of them being really thick structures with the little tiny lumen. Okay, this is why you probably can feel them pulsating through your body. Some other information about arteries. Again, I think you can read through most of this. Like, the largest one you have is the aorta, which is what we're going to really look at here later on in the week. And then arteries do branch into smaller. All arteries branch into smaller arteries called arterioles, and then arterioles branch into capillaries. So I'll show you a picture of that later on in this PowerPoint. The really weird arteries in our body are called the pulmonary arteries, and that is because they, they carry oxygenated poor or deoxygenated blood away from the heart, but they go to the lungs. So they're just very unique, and we probably won't spend a lot of time talking about them this year, okay? Some diseases of arteries, two top leading causes of diseases, usually in the United States, is a heart attack or a stroke, and that is your disease of arteries. So a myocardial infarction, that's fancy for a heart attack, and a cerebral vascular accident is fancy for a stroke. If you want more information about these, you can click on this information here on the PowerPoint, and you can kind of see some more information about them. Okay. That leads us to our second type of blood vessel, which are called the veins. And again, veins I usually have as blue because the majority of veins in the human body carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So we refer to them as afferent vessels. They collect blood from all of the tissues and organs that we have in our body, and they return it back to the heart. For the most part, veins are going to be a lot thinner than arteries. So they don't have so much blood pressure going through them. This is one reason why the most common way to get blood out of your body is called a venipuncture, and it's through your veins because they're under low pressure. All right, so let's look at inside of a vein. Same thing, still the same three tissue layers. So they still have the three, but in a little bit different amounts. Like this external one, the adventitia layer, the tunica adventitia, again, is the outermost layer, but it's only made up of connective tissue. And actually, this is their thickest layer. We'll show you. Unlike an artery, this is their thickest layer. The tunica media, which is the middle one, is actually pretty thin. It does contain a lot of collagen fibers that makes it elastic and elastic fibers, but not a whole bunch of muscle, like smooth muscle tissue. There is some, but not as much because you can't, as an artery, because you can't feel them pulsating. Your veins aren't pulsating. Correct. And then the inner one is the tunica intima. And again, also, this is made up of epithelial tissue. A lot of times in this one, we do see some valves forming. Veins, because if you think about it, they have to bring all blood back to your heart. So think about the blood like in your foot and how it has to defy gravity and come up your leg back to your heart. And so what our body has done is we have these little valves that I'm going to show you here in just a second. So once the blood reaches a certain area of your body, it doesn't pool back down. And that's the purpose of those valves. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here are the tissue layers. Again, if you compare this picture to the arteries, can you first of all see how this is really thinner? This whole thing is thinner, but they have a much bigger lumen, which is an opening, okay? Their outer layer, again, is going to be a little bit thinner than the middle layer. Sorry, that's just the opposite. Sorry, the outer layer is going to be a little bit thicker. Okay, so the outer layer is going to be a little bit thicker in veins than that middle layer. The middle layer does have some muscle tissue in it, but not a lot because you can't feel your veins pulsating. And then again, they are lined with this very thin epithelial tissue. Okay, it is the same. We call them the same tissues. They're just going to be a little bit different. The biggest thing is that they do have these big valves for damming purposes. Yes, and I'll show you how that works here in a minute. Okay, in fact, here we go. Veins have valves. So you can kind of see, like, when your muscles are relaxed, the veins are closed. So any blood that is made it here, we kind of shut it down, and so that it doesn't pool back. We don't want it to leak, right? And then when the muscles contract, the valves can open, and then the blood is sent back to the heart. Okay, so it is really like a damming system that you have in your body. So veins are very different than your arteries. Bad things can happen to your veins because sometimes the valves can get a little on the leaky side. When you have leaky valves, we call that varicose veins. You might have heard of that before. This is usually a common thing that happens to people as we age. We can get varicose veins, especially in your legs. That's just because you've maybe stood up a lot in your life, or you sat down a lot in your life, and the veins just kind of get a little leaky. Okay. Usually it's not serious. It can be a really serious problem in some individuals, and they have to go in and have surgery done on their varicose veins. So this would be weakened walls, and this would be healthy. I'm sure many of you have this. Older people usually have that. All right, our last blood vessel is called a capillary, and the reason purposely they have both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood because this is where we exchange. It's called an exchange vessel. The walls permit exchange between the blood and the surrounding interstitial fluid, which means capillaries are super thin, and this is how we get oxygen to our body cells, and pick up the carbon dioxide out of our body cells. Blood flows through capillaries pretty slow so that the exchange can happen. Arteries, veins, especially arteries, the blood is really pumping fast, but capillaries pretty slow. They usually do not function as an individual unit, like more of a capillary bed, which I'm going to show you. And usually like one arteriole, which is a little tiny artery, gives rise to lots of capillaries, and then the capillaries will feed into eventually one little tiny venule, and then back to the big veins. There are no named capillaries in our body. They're so tiny. You cannot see them with the naked eye. In fact, let me show you what one looks like. They are only one cell thick. They only have this tunica intima only. They don't really have anything else. So this is just epithelial tissue. You can see, again, their structure is dependent upon their function. It's for gas exchange. So because it's only one cell thick, you can see how oxygen can move out and carbon dioxide can move in. No named capillaries. Again, you cannot see them with your naked eye. They are all super microscopic because they're only one cell thick. Here's what that would kind of look like as the filtration happens, like as we go from oxygenated to deoxygenated. On the arterial end, you'd have oxygen leaving the capillary, and at the venule end, you'd have carbon dioxide being reabsorbed into the capillary. Okay. These are those capillary beds that we were talking about. This is from your book. Again, that's one little tiny artery feeding into lots of capillaries, and this is where the gas exchange occurs. And then lots of capillaries feed into one little tiny vein called a venule, and then eventually into a big vein and back to your heart. Okay, so again, capillaries are the gas exchange. From this point on, I just have a couple of pictures to show you. I would keep going back to these pictures just so you get a firm understanding of the three types of tissues that make up both arteries and veins, but yet capillaries are only made up of one type of tissue, the very thinnest one. I like this picture because it shows oxygenated blood going into the artery, and it's going away from the heart, and then deoxygenated blood coming back through the veins. They have to go through valves, and it's going back to your heart. Okay? And again, they're connected by little tiny capillaries. So that's a good picture to look at. Here's another good picture. I'm just trying to show you lots of examples of this. It's more of a cross section. Again, I like this because veins have valves, arteries don't. Can you see how thick an artery is? Veins are not as thick. Okay, smaller lumen, bigger lumen. And this is a nice little cross section of that one more time. So you can kind of see them all side by side. Again, this is why, a venipuncture, it's easier to get blood out of a vein for medical purposes than arteries because they're so thick and the blood is under so much pressure. And then again, capillaries are only one cell thick. Okay, probably what you're going to be interested in is this last slide. So you might want to take some notes over this. This should help you with your assignment. This just gives you a nice little summary of all the blood vessels. It goes over everything, like what's the purpose of them, like why, arteries have really high blood pressure, high pressure in them, because they're so thick and they have so much muscles. And this is again why, veins have low blood pressure, low pressure. They're a little bit wider, a little thinner. This is why it's easier to get blood out of your veins than your arteries. Okay, veins are the only ones with valves, and then you can see how they have, both veins and arteries have the three types of tissues making them up, and capillaries only have one. Check this out, please. If you have any questions about blood vessels, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you. All right, thanks so much.